Welcome to 1,000 Nights and One Night. Today we continue with the ninth night. And now, when it was the ninth night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the young woman, the sorceress, took in hand some of the tarn water and spake over its words not to be understood, the fishes lifted their heads and stood up on the instant like men, the spell on the people having been removed. What was the lake again became a crowded capital. The bazaars were thronged with folk who bought and sold. Each citizen was occupied with his own calling, and the four hills, well, they became islands as they are whilom. Then the young woman, the wicked sorceress, returned to the king, and still thinking he was the Negro, said to him, "O my love, stretch forth thy honored hand that I may assist thee to rise." "Nearer to me," quoth the king, in a faint and feigned tone. She came close as to embrace him, when he took up the sword lying hid by his side and smote her across the breast, so that the point showed gleaming behind her back. Then he smote her a second time and cut her in twain, and cast her to the ground in two halves. After which he fared forth and found the young man, now freed from the spell, awaiting him, and gave him joy of his happy release, while the prince kissed his hand with abundant thanks. Quoth the king, "Wilt thou abide in this city, or go with me to my capital?" Quoth the youth, "O, O king of the age, wottest thou not what journey is between thee and thy city?" 2 days and a half. "O king, wake! Between thee and thy city is a year's march for a well-girt walker, and thou hast not come hither in 2 and a half, save that city was under enchantment. And I, O king, will never part from thee, no, not even for the twinkling of an eye." The king rejoiced at this word and said, "Oh, thanks be to Allah who hath bestowed thee upon me. From this hour thou art my son, and my only son, for that in all my life I have never been blessed with issue. Therefore, upon the embrace, enjoyed with exceeding great joy, and reaching the palace, the prince who had been spellbound informed his lords and his grandees that he was about to visit the holy places as a pilgrim, and he bade them get ready all things necessary for the occasion. The preparations lasted 10 days, after which he set out with the sultan, whose heart burned in yearning for his city, whence he had been absent a whole 12 months. They journeyed with an escort of Mamelukes, carrying all manner of precious gifts and rarities, not stinted by wayfaring day and night for a full year, until they approached the sultan's capital and sent on messengers to announce their coming. Then the wazir and the whole army came out to meet him in joy and gladness, for they had given up all hope of ever seeing their king. And the troops, well, they kissed the ground before him and wished him joy of his safety. He entered and took seat upon his throne, and the minister came before him. And when acquainted with all that had befallen the young prince, he congratulated him on his narrow escape. When order was restored throughout the land of the king, he gave him largesse to many of his people, and said to the wazir, "Hither the fisherman who brought us the fishes." So he went for the man who had been the first cause of the city and the citizens being delivered from enchantment. And when he came into the presence, the sultan bestowed upon him a dress of honor, and questioned him of his condition, and whether he had children. The fisherman gave him to know that he had 2 daughters and a son. So the king sent for them, and taking one daughter to wife, gave the other to the young prince, and made the son his head treasurer. Furthermore, he invested his wazir with the sultanate of the city of the Black Islands, whilom belonging to the young prince, and dispatched him with an escort of 50 armed slaves, together with dresses of honor for all the emirs and grandees. The wazir kissed hands and fared forth on his way, while the sultan and the prince abode at home in all the solace and delight of life. And the fisherman, he became the richest man of his age, and his daughters wived with kings, until death came to them. And yet, O king, this is not more wondrous than the story of the porter and the three ladies of Baghdad. Once upon a time, there was a porter in Baghdad who was a bachelor and who would remain unmarried. It came to pass on a certain day, as he stood about the street, leaning idly upon his crate, behold, there stood before him an honorable woman in a mantilla of Mosul, silk embroidered with gold and bordered with brocade. Her walking shoes were also purfled with gold, and her hair floated in long plaits. She raised her face veil, and showing two black eyes fringed with jetty lashes, whose glances were soft and languishing, and whose perfect beauty was ever blandishing, she accosted the porter and said in the suavest tones and choicest language, "Take up thy crate and follow me." The porter was so dazzled he could hardly believe that he had heard this. "O day of good luck! O day of all his grace!" and walked after her till she stopped at the door of a house. There she rapped, and presently came out to her a man, a Nazarene, to whom she gave a gold piece, receiving from him in return what she required of strained wine clear as olive oil. And she set it safely in the hamper, saying, "Lift and follow." Quoth the porter, "This, by Allah, is indeed an auspicious day, a day propitious for granting of all men's wishes." He again hoisted up the crate and followed her till she stopped at a fruiterer's shop, and bought from him some Shamani apples, some Osmani quinces, Omani peaches, and cucumbers of Nile growth, Egyptian limes, sultani oranges, and citrons, besides Alpine jasmine, scented myrtle berries, damascene, nephars, flowers of privet, and chamomile, blood red anemones, violets and pomegranate blooms, eglantine and narcissus, and set the whole in the porter's crate, saying, "Up with it." So he lifted and followed her till she stopped at the butcher's booth and said, "Cut me off 10 pounds of mutton." She paid him his price, and wrapped it in a banana leaf, whereupon she laid it in the crate and said, "Hoist, O porter." He hoisted accordingly, and followed her as she walked on. She stopped at a grocer's, where she bought dried fruit and pistachio kernels, Tihanama raisins, shelled almonds, and all wanted for dessert, and said to the porter, "Lift and follow." So he up with his hamper, and till she stayed at the confectioner's, and she bought an earthen platter, and piled it with all kinds of sweetmeats in his shop, openwork tarts and fritters scented with musk, and soap cakes, and lemon loaves, and melon preserves, and zayab combs, and lady fingers, and kaza tidbits, and goodies of every description, and placed the platter in the porter's crate. Thereupon, quoth he, being a merry man, "Thou shouldst have told me, and I would have brought me with me a pony or she camel to carry all this market stuff." She smiled and gave him a little cuff on the nape, saying, "Step out and exceed not in words, for all are willing. Thy wage will not be wanting." Then she stopped at a perfumer's, and took from him 10 sorts of waters, rose scented with musk, orange flower, water lily, willow flower, violet, and 5 others. And she also bought 2 loaves of sugar, a bottle of perfume spraying, a lump of male incense, aloe wood, ambergris, and musk, with candles of Alexandria wax. And she put the whole into the basket, saying, "Up with thy crate and after me." He did so, and he followed her until she stood before the greengrocer's, of whom she bought pickled safflower and olives, in brine and in oil, with tarragon and cream cheese, and hard Syrian cheese, and she stowed them away in the crate, saying to the porter, "Take up thy basket and follow me." He did so, and went after her till she came to a fair mansion, fronted by a spacious court, a tall, fine place to which columns gave strength and grace, and the gate thereof had 2 leaves of ebony inlaid with plates of red gold. The lady stopped at the door, and turning her face veil sideways, knocked softly with her knuckles, whilst the porter stood behind her, thinking of naught save her beauty and her loveliness. Presently the door swung back, and both leaves were opened, whereupon he looked to see who had opened it, and behold, it was a lady of tall figure, some 5 feet high, a model of beauty and loveliness, brilliance and symmetry and perfect grace. Her forehead was flower white, her cheeks like an anemone ruddy bright, her eyes were those of wild heifer or the gazelle, with eyebrows like the crescent moon which ends Shaphan and begins Ramazan. Her mouth was the ring of Solomon, her lips coral red, and her teeth like a line of strung pearls or of chamomile petals. Her throat recalled the antelope's, and her breasts, like 2 pomegranates of even size, stood at the bay as it were. Her body rose and fell in waves below her dress, like the rolls of a piece of brocade, and her navel would hold an ounce of benzoin ointment. In fine, she was like her of whom the poet said, O sun and moon of Pallas, cast thy sight. Enjoy her flower-like face, her fragrant light. Then I shall never see in hair so black beauty, in case a brow so purely white. The ruddy rosy cheek proclaims her claim, though fail her name whose beauties we indite. As sways her gait, I smile at hips so big, and weep to see the waist they bear so slight. When the porter looked upon her writs were waylaid, and his senses were stormed, so that his crate went nigh to fall from his head, and he said to himself, Never have I in my life seen a day more blessed than this day. Then quoth the lady portress to the lady cateress, Come in from the gate and relieve the poor man of his load. So the provisioner went in, followed by the portress and the porter, and went on till they reached a spacious ground floor hall, built with admirable skill and beautified with all manner of colors and carvings, with upper balconies and groined arches and galleries, and cupboards and recesses whose curtains hung before them. In the midst stood a great basin full of water, surrounding a fine fountain, and at the upper end of the raised dais was a couch of juniper wood, set with gems and pearls, with a canopy like mosquito curtains of red satin silk, looped up with the pearls as big as filberts and bigger. Thereupon sat a lady bright of blee with brow, beaming brilliancy, the dream of philosophy, whose eyes were fraught with Babel's gramarye, and her eyebrows were artious for archery. Her breath breathed ambergris and perfumery, and her lips were sugar to taste and carnelian to see. Her statue was straight as the letter Alph, and her face shamed the noon sun's radiance. And she was even as a galaxy, or a dome with golden marquetie, or a bride displayed in the choicest finery, or a noble maid of Araby. Right well of her sang the bard when he said, Her smiles 'twin rows of pearls display, chamomile buds or ramery spray. Her tresses stray as night let down, and shames her light the dawn o' day. The third lady, rising from the couch, stepped forward with graceful sway, gait till she reached the middle of the saloon, where she said to her sisters, Why stand ye here? Take it down from this poor man's head. Then the cateress went and stood before him, and the portress behind him, while the third helped, and they lifted the load from the porter's head, and emptied it all out, thereupon set everything in its place. Lastly, they gave him 2 gold pieces, saying, Wend thy way, O porter. But he went not, for he stood looking at the ladies, and admiring what uncommon beauty was theirs, and their pleasant manners and kindly dispositions. Never had he seen goodlier. And he gazed wistfully at their good store of wines and sweet-scented flowers and fruits and other matters. Also he marvelled with exceedingly marvel, especially to see no man in the place, and delayed his going. Whereupon quoth the eldest lady, what aileth thee that thou goest not? Haply thy wage be too little. And turning to her sister, the cateress, she said, give him another dinar. But the porter answered, by Allah, my lady, it is not for the wage. My hire is never more than 2 dirhams, but in very sooth my heart and my soul are taken up with you and your condition. I wonder to see you single, with ne'er a mound about you, and not a soul to bear you company. And while you wot that the minaret toppleth, or unless it stand upon 4, and you want this same 4th, the women's pleasure without man is short of measure, even as the poets say. Seest not, we want for joy 4 things all told, the harp and flute, the lute and flageolet, and we be thy companion with sense fourfold, rose, myrtle, anemone, and violet. Nor please all 8 and 4 thou wouldst withhold, good wine and youth and gold and pretty pet. You be 3 and want a 4th, who shall be a person of good sense and prudence, smart-witted, and one apt to keep careful counsel. His words pleased and amused them, and they laughed at him and said, and who is to assure us of that? We are maidens, and we fear to entrust our secret where it might be kept. For we have read in certain chronicles the lines of one Ibn al-Suman, hold fast thy secret and to none unfold. Lost is a secret when that secret's told, and fail thy breast thy secret to conceal. How canst thou hope another's breast shall hold? And Abu Nawas said well on that subject, who trusts a secret to another hand, upon his brow deserveth burn a brand. When the porter heard their words, he rejoined, by your lives, I am a man of sense and discreet, who hath read books and perused chronicles. I reveal the fair and conceal the foul, and I act as the poet adviseth. None but the good a secret keep, and good men keep it unrevealed. It is to me a well-shut house, with keyless locks, and door ensealed. When the maidens heard his verse, and its poetical application addressed to them, they said, thou knowest that we have laid out all our moneys on this place. Now say, hast thou aught to offer us in return for entertainment? For surely we will not suffer thee to sit in our company and be our cup companion, and gaze upon our face so fair and so rare, without paying a round sum. Wouldst thou not the saying? Sans hope of gain, love's not worth a grain. Whereto the lady portress added, if thou bring anything, thou art a something. If no thing be off with thee, thou art a nothing. But the procuratrix interposed, saying, nay, O my sisters, leave teasing him, for by Allah he hath not failed us this day, and he hath been other he never had kept patience with me. So whatever he be his shot and scot, I will take it upon myself. The porter, overjoyed, kissed the ground before her and thanked her, saying, by Allah, these monies are the first fruits of this day hath given me. Hearing this, they say, sit thee down, and welcome to thee. And the eldest lady added, by Allah, we may not suffer thee to join us, save on one condition, and this is it, that no questions be asked as to what concerneth thee not, and frowardness shall be soundly flogged. Answered the porter, I agree to this, O my lady. O my head and my eyes be it. Look, I am dumb. I have no tongue. Then arose the provisioness, and tightening her girdle, set the table by the fountain, put the flowers and sweet herbs in their jars, and strained the wine, and ranged the flask in a row, and made ready every requisite. Then sat she down, she and her sisters, placing amidst them the porter, who kept deeming himself in a dream. And she took up the wine flagon, and poured out the first cup, and drank it off, and likewise a second and a third. After this she filled a 4th cup, which she handed to one of her sisters, and lastly they crowned a goblet, and passed it to the porter, saying, drink the dear draught, drink free and fain, what healeth every grief and pain. He took the cup in his hand, and louting low, returned his best thanks, and improvised, Drain not the bowl, save with a trusty friend, a man of worth whose good old blood all know. For wine like wind sucks sweetness from the sweet, and stinks when over stench it haply blow. Drain not the bowl, save from dear hand like thine. The cup recalls thy gifts, thou gifts of wine. After repeating this couplet, he kissed her hands and drank and was drunk, and sat swaying from side to side and perused. All drinks wherein is blood, the law unclean doth hold save one, the bloodshed of the vine. Fill, fill, take all my wealth, bequeath to one, thou fawn, a willing ransom for these eyes. Then the craters. She crowned a cup and gave it to the portress, who took it from her hand and thanked her and drank. Thereupon she poured again, and passed it to the eldest lady, who sat on the couch, and filled it yet another and handed it to the porter. He kissed the ground before them, and after drinking and thanking them, he again began to recite, Here, here, by Allah, here, cups of the sweet, the dear, filling me a brimming bowl, the fountain of life I spear. Then the porter stood up before the mistress of the house and said, O lady, I am thy serve, thy mameluke, thy white thrall, thy very bondsman. And he began reciting. A slave of slaves there standeth at thy door, lauding thy generous boons and gifts galore. Beauty, may he come in a while to joy thy charms, for love and I part nevermore. She said to him, Drink, and health and happiness attend thy drink. So he took the cup and kissed her hand and recited these lines in sing-song. I gave her bracel wine that like her cheeks blushed red or flame from furnace flaring up. She bussed the brim and said with many a smile, How durst thou deal folks cheap for folk to sup? Drink, said I. These are tears of mine, whose tinct is heart-blood sighs have boiled in the cup. She answered him in the following couplet. And tears of blood for me, friend, thou hast shed. Suffer me sup them by thy head and eyes. Then the lady took the cup and drank it off to her sister's health. And they ceased not drinking, the porter being in the midst of them, and dancing and laughing and reciting verses and singing ballads. All this time, the porter was carrying on with them, kissing, toying, biting, handling, groping, fingerling, whilst one thrust a dainty morsel in his mouth and another slapped him. And this cuffed his cheek, and that threw sweet flowers at him, and he was in the very paradise of pleasure, as though he were sitting in the seventh sphere among the horrors of heaven. They ceased not doing after this fashion, until the wine played tricks in their heads and worsted their wits. And then, when the drink got the better of them, the portress stood up and doffed her clothes till she was mother naked. However, she let down her hair about her body by way of shift, and throwing herself into the basin, disported herself, and dived like a duck, and swam up and down, and took water in her mouth, and spurted it all over the porter, and washed her limbs, and between her breasts, and inside her thighs, and all around her navel. Then she came up out of the cistern, throwing herself on the porter's lap, and said, O my lord, O my love, what callest thou this article? Pointing to her solution of continuity. I call that a cleft, quoth the porter. And she rejoined, Art thou not ashamed to use such a word? And she caught him by the collar and soundly cuffed him. Said he again, Thy womb? And she struck him a second slap, crying, Oh, fie, fie, this is an ugly word. Is there no shame in thee? Then cried the porter, Thy slit? Whereafter the eldest lady came down upon him with a yet sorer beating and said, No. And he said, 'Tis so. And the porter went on calling the same commodity by sundry other names, but whatever he said, they beat him more and more till his neck ached and swelled with the blows he had gotten. And on this wise they made him a butt and a laughing stock. At last he turned upon them, asking, And what do you women call this article? Whereto the damsel made answer, The basil of the bridges. Cried the porter, Thank Allah for my safety. Aid me and be thou propitious, O basil of the bridges. And they passed around the cup, and tossed off the bowl again. When the second lady stood up and, stripping off all her clothes, cast herself into the cistern and did as the first had done. Then she came out of the water and, throwing her naked form on the porter's lap, poured into her machine and said, "Oh, light of my eyes, do tell me what is the name of this concern?" He replied as before, "Thy Cleo." And she rejoined, "Hath no such term, no shame of thee?" And cuffed him and buffeted him till the saloon rang with the blows. Then quoth she, oh fie, how canst thou say this without blushing?" He suggested, "The basil of the bridges." But she would not have it, and she said, "No, no," and struck him and slapped him on the back of the neck. Then he began calling out all the names he knew, and the girls kept on saying, "No, no, no." So he said, "I stick to the basil of the bridges." And all the three laughed till they fell on their backs and laid slaps on his neck and said, "No, no, no, that's not its proper name." Thereupon he cried, "Oh, my sisters, what is its name?" And they replied, "What sayest thou to the husked sesame seed?" Then the cateress donned her clothes, and they fell again to carousing. But the porter kept moaning, "Oh, oh," for his neck and shoulders, and the cup passed merrily around and around and around again for another full hour. After that time, the eldest and the handsomest lady stood up and stripped off her garments, whereupon the porter took his neck in hand and rubbed and shampooed it, saying, "My neck and shoulders on the way of Allah." Then she threw herself into the basin and swam and dived and sported and washed, and the porter looked at her naked figure as though she had been a slice of the moon, and had her face with the sheen of Luna when at full, or like the dawn when it brighteneth, and he noted her noble stature, and the shape, and those glorious forms that quivered as she went, for she was naked as the Lord made her. Then he cried, "Alack, alack!" and he began to address her, versifying in these couplets: "If I liken thy shape to the bough when green, my likeness errs, and I sore mistake it. For the bough is fairest when clad the most, and thou art fairest when mother naked." When the lady heard these verses, she came up from out of the basin, sitting herself upon his lap and knees, pointing to her organ, and said, "Oh, my lordling, what be the name of this?" Quoth he, "The basil of the bridges." But she said, "Bah!" Quoth he, "The sesame." Quoth she, "Pooh, pooh." Then said he, "Thy womb?" And she cried, "Fie! Fie! Art thou not ashamed of thyself?" And cuffed him on the nape of the neck. And whatsoever name he came declaring, "'Tis so," she beat him and cried, "No, no, no." At last he said, "Oh, my sisters, what is its name?" She replied, "It is entitled The Khan of Abu Mansur." Whereupon the porter replied, "Ha, ha, ha, ha. Oh, Allah be praised for safe deliverance, O Khan of Abu Mansur." Then she came forth and dressed, and the cup went round another full hour. At last the porter rose up, stripping off all his clothes, jumped into the tank and swam about, and washed under his bearded chin and his armpits, even as they had done. Then he came out and threw himself into the first lady's lap, and rested his arms upon the lap of the portress, and posed his legs in the lap of the cateress, and pointed to his organ and said, "Oh, my mistress, what is the name of this article?" All laughed at his word till they fell on their backs and said, "Thy tool." But he replied, "No," and gave each of them a bite by way of forfeit. Then said they, "Thy pizzle," and he cried, "No," and gave them each a hug. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. So for now we stop with this tale until tomorrow.